Alright. Good morning. Today, let's talk about Bernie. Now, I used to be a huge Bernie fan. Even put a sticker on my car in 2016. But a lot has changed since then with me. And a lot hasn't changed with Bernie's approach. You see, in democratic societies like ours, when they are in distress, they behave like patients with chronic pain. They're tense, exhausted, irritable, and unable to see clearly because every movement hurts. Inequality, financial insecurity, and stagnation have just become the background noise of our everyday life. Like a backup power generator that never shuts off, never gives you that relief from the noise. Anybody that's ever worked on a construction site will know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, when a society reaches this stage, it begins to crave relief more than it craves actual solutions. And this is where Bernie entered the American bloodstream, not as a poison, but also not as a cure. He came in as the morphine of democracy, the drug you reach for when you can't bear the pain anymore. Now, he didn't create this role. The public assigned it to him, and the political establishment was delighted to let him fill that role. He became the painkiller of American democracy. Now, I didn't know this when I jumped on the Bernie wagon back in 2015, but wow, he really fucked us on that one. A majority of us all knew that if he ran as an independent, he would win. And I still believe that. No fucking doubt in my mind. But it didn't happen. And that happening inspired me to dig deeper into why. Why did this happen? Because it just didn't seem right. Something seemed off. Came from his ability to speak directly to the public suffering. He names the villains. He roars against inequality. He validates the sense that something is wrong with our democracy and that someone finally cares. That validation was intoxicating. I mean, it hit like a warm wave of concern. But a temporary relief from suffering is not correction. Bernie focuses on redistribution or charity, rather than attacking the structures that create the whole need for charity or redistribution in the first place. He focuses on the downstream effects of all of the structural mechanisms that create inequality, poverty, the need for charity. I mean, his outrage feels righteous, but it circles the symptoms, never the cause. So just like morphine, his rhetoric soothes without repairing. It provides emotional clarity while leaving the structural confusion totally untouched, which allows these problems to continue and get worse. The fundamental injustice in the United States does not come from individuals' greed or bad actors. It comes from structural privileges embedded in the law. Specifically, the ability of private actors to siphon unearned wealth from the public through land monopolies, real estate speculation, financial rent seeking, concentrated control of natural monopolies, and legal frameworks that reward extraction over production or sitting on your ass over working. These legal mechanisms quietly transfer economic value upward without producing anything in return. They are the root of inequality, the root of political polarization, the root of the housing crisis, stagnant wages, and civic decay. Bernie rarely touches any of this. He pushes all of our attention to the billionaires, the oligarchs, the beneficiaries of our corrupt legal structure. It's like, Bernie, how did they become billionaires in the first place? I mean, I'm starting to think he believes we're all stupid. I mean, I fell for it too. So at one point, I was more stupid than I am now. You know, it makes me think of Bernie standing at a podium, surrounded by the largest gathering of Americans ever. And behind him is like a apple orchard with all these apple trees. Then Bernie is shouting at the apples. This is a applegarchy. We need to deal with these apples in order to fix the tree. Now, I'm no fucking apple farmer, but I know damn well you're not gonna change the fucking apples without looking at the tree. The tree that causes some of these apples to get huge and some of these apples to stay super skinny. But Bernie looks past structural abuse and focuses on emotional narratives. Now, I don't really get that. He seems so well studied, yet he distracts from the foundation that supports all of the things that he opposes. This is why his political revolution left the architecture of inequality perfectly intact. So there's a paradox going on here. A reformer who offers relief without structural results ends up empowering the very forces that he condemns, which ends up looking pretty fucking dark. He ends up just creating a chain reaction of events. First, he promises transformative outcomes by using non-transformative tools. Then, relief is felt, but material conditions don't improve. Then the public becomes disillusioned with the reform itself. Then the right exploits this disillusionment with simplistic, forceful rhetoric. Then voters go to the other side reactively because hope turned into disappointment. Now, this is not a Bernie specific phenomenon. It's a historical pattern. Bernie is just the modern day watered down version of Fighting Bob in the early 20th century, who was fighting for the same things, just with a little more hair on his chest. Bernie's sincerity makes no difference to this outcome. Morphine, like sincerity, doesn't need intent to be addictive. It just needs to relieve pain without addressing the cause. And that's what Bernie's movement did. People felt like someone was finally listening to them because Bernie was voicing our needs and our struggles. All the while, the structure that creates this inequality remained unthreatened. I mean, but they did make a great show of the danger to entrenched interests. I mean, fuck, from where I'm sitting now, it seems like a fucking sick joke. I can imagine a room full of men in 2016 watching all this shit happen while they're sipping martinis, watching all of us flock to Bernie like lost children. I mean, maybe this whole martini meeting never happened, but my spidey senses are definitely tingling. Bernie didn't really become a political actor, but more of a symbolic object, a vessel for public longing, a bright light to distract us from actually coming together. A distraction because we all thought, oh, Bernie's got this. He stands for us. We need to fucking stand for ourselves. This whole representative shit needs to be fucking done. Anyway, symbols can inspire, but they can also pacify. When people believe a champion is fighting on their behalf, they often withdraw from participating. Generationally entrenched interests understand this instinctively. Better to let the masses pour their hope into a charismatic reformer who changes nothing than a reformer who's leading a structural reform movement that could overturn the rules. And keeping Bernie off of the major news networks was definitely a clever way for us to justify our devotion to Bernie. That was when Bernie became the morphine for our democracy, because he was strong enough to numb the anger, but not strong enough to provoke structural confrontation. And he was always ready to redirect public frustration back into electoral rituals so we can fight to give ourselves a little breathing room from the constant oppression rather than economic empowerment. A revolution that leaves the structure intact is not a revolution. That's just a pressure valve. So if Bernie is the morphine, then structural reform is the surgery. It demands clarity, not temporary pressure relief. It demands confronting the machine, not the emotions it generates. Here's what an actual democratic repair requires. First is to break the land monopoly. The land monopoly that the banks mostly own, just like the mortgage on your house. The foundation of economic injustice lies in the private capture of publicly created land value. This is where all value from people flows through, because there's nowhere humans can do anything without the land. They can't get into space without the land. They can't get into the air without the land. They can't get into the water without the land. The price of your house, the cost of your groceries, the price of your gas, the cost of your internet, debt, taxes, wages, employment, all of that is dictated by the population of a country, the population of a state, a county, a city, and your neighborhood. Real reform demands taxing land value or unearned land value, not the labor. Real reform demands eliminating speculative profit on mere ownership of land. Real reform demands returning the land rent to the community. Real reform demands freeing production from tax burdens that punish work. If you fix the land system, housing will stabilize. It's the apple tree that has the issue, not the fucking apples. Fix the tree, fix the apples. You fix the roots, you fix the problems that come from the roots. The American financial sector extracts fees, interest, and leverages profits without contributing to the economy. Structural reform requires breaking up systematic risk institutions, eliminating predatory lending by creating trusts, eliminating speculative derivatives, and directing capital into productive investment. Finance should power the real economy, not drain it. Not drain it like the machines in the Matrix draining people. We are not batteries. Please, if you can see this, you understand where I'm coming from, please comment. Or if you think I'm out of my mind, also comment. We're gonna also need to reclaim natural monopolies, the ones we gifted to private interests. And we're gonna need to make those public utilities again. You know, the ones that we used to pay very low cost for, or they were free, but now we have to not only subsidize them, but also pay an extra fee on top. So let's all agree that was a fucking terrible idea. Utilities that we all use, well, that fucking makes more sense for us to be in control of them, not for private interests to just fucking rape us for them. Industries like electricity, water, broadband, railroads, roads, basic data infrastructure cannot function competitively. Leaving them in private hands is equivalent to privatizing taxation. Real reform means shifting these utilities to a public trust, managed by its relevant population. Also enforcing transparent costs and pricing, and guaranteeing universal access to these utilities that all of us need. This prevents oligarchic or appligarchic capture of essential infrastructure. We also obviously need to rebuild the tax system around production instead of extraction. A sane, justified tax system encourages work and discourages people from being parasites who live off the backs of others. That means removing taxes on labor, trade, and enterprise to free up production. Capturing rents from land, natural resources, or monopoly profits and speculative gains. Doing this makes extracting from the population unprofitable. It would be like placing a fat, wet pillow on top of a dish rack where you let the dishes dry. Gently too, because we don't want to hurt these billionaires or these giant hedge funds. I mean, we're not trying to hurt the monopolies or billionaires. Come on. We're not going to fall for that game of using violence to create more violence. I think we're all done with that shit, right? So when you do this with those big fat pillows, big fat wet pillows, all the water won't instantly drain out of these pillows. But eventually, once enough of the water is drained out of these pillows, these big fat wet pillows will shrink down to the size where they fall through the dish rack. Down here with the rest of us. On this equal plane where inheritance belongs to everyone. Where it doesn't matter if your family was royalty before. Everybody gets inheritance. Everybody born on this earth. When an economy rewards value creation instead of value extraction, inequality collapses from the bottom up. Now, it is important we focus on decentralizing power while at the same time localizing responsibility. Real democracy happens close to the ground, not up in the clouds of modern economic theory. Structural reform demands pushing decision-making downward, keeping local wealth in local communities, and reducing federal-level corruption incentives. Local empowerment builds innovation and resilience. But more importantly, it provides the space and time for culture to grow rather than being swallowed alive by a grind-to-live economy. Stabilization of material conditions are also imperative, so citizens have the resources to govern effectively and efficiently. Political agency requires economic breathing room. Reform requires stable housing, reliable wages, a predictive economic structure, immune to fluctuations caused by speculation, and broad access to opportunities without paywalls designed to prevent access. A population constantly fighting for survival cannot act democratically. So oligarchy or appligarchy isn't a conspiracy. It's just the structural outcome of bad incentives. When we break that loop, we remove corporate money from politics. We implement public campaign financing. We restrict lobbying. And we close that fucking revolving door. Democracy only works when political power is not for sale. And every relevant person is involved in every decision made that will affect them. This is really not a big ask, but it is definitely something we will never get in this obsolete representative government that acts like a bottleneck of human progress. So why does Bernie never point to the root? Bernie is beloved because he speaks to our suffering, but he is ineffective because he never names the root of inequality. He is popular because he comforts us, but he is harmless because he doesn't threaten the architecture. This is why he became democracy's morphine, the painkiller that lets the system survive its own contradictions for just a little bit longer. Morphine is not evil. It's just simply the wrong tool for a broken spine. The United States doesn't need another painkiller. It needs structural reform, the kind that corrects bad incentives, dismantles monopolies, and captures unearned rents, and return that value back to the community that created the value. If democracy is to survive, it must choose surgery over sedation. Relief is not recovery, it's charity. It's giving a fish, not tending the pond. Comfort is not justice, it is a distraction. Us taking the bait. And passion, without structural reform, is nothing but a warm, temporary high. A high that hides our pain, that hides our struggle. Real democracy begins the moment people stop reaching for painkillers and start demanding cures. Structural cures. This is where the morphine wears off. Nothing changes until we stop letting them divide us into tribes, into parties, into personality cults. All groups that chase the symptoms instead of the cause. The system survives by keeping us angry with each other instead of directing it towards the machinery that bleeds all of us dry. So enough of that. Enough left versus right, blue versus red. Enough cheering for champions that will never touch the foundation. The real fight is not between us. It's between all of us and the structure that keeps profiting from keeping us divided. If we want a country that actually works, then we have to do the one thing that they fear most. We need to stand together. We need to think for ourselves. And we need to rebuild the system at its roots. United. Unbought. Unfucking stoppable. Alright, thanks for watching my video. See you tomorrow. Peace.